and welcome to my channel if this is the first video of mine that you are watching, but if it is not, welcome back. Today I thought that I would just film a chatty, probably rambly, probably not quite so short video all about how I rate my books, because I realize that in reading updates or reading wrap-ups, I'll often say that I gave a book 3 stars or 4 stars or 3.5, but I've never actually explained what each star rating means for me and what distinguishes a 5-star read from a 4-star read. So I thought I would just dive in to my arbitrary rating system because there's a little bit of rhyme and reason to it, but it is very emotionally driven. So I don't know how long this video is going to be, so make sure that you are cozy and perhaps get yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a refreshing little cocktail, and let's dive right into the books. So like I've already said, my ranking system is a little bit arbitrary, and because it is so emotionally driven. I have studied English literature at a post-secondary level. I've read books within that academic setting, and I've had that very critical lens at being able to look at a piece of writing for the style of writing, for the usage of plot devices, even if it contains perhaps less palatable subject matter. But nowadays, I have been out of university for several years. My reading is very casual. When I pick up a book, yes, I am analyzing the strength of writing and I'm looking at the plot devices that are being used. But first and foremost, I'm picking up a book to enjoy the experience. I often turn to fiction for a little bit of escapism and just to enjoy the story that is being told. So I'm much more casual in my approach to literature and reading nowadays versus my time at university, and that factors into my rating system. I'm not necessarily going to give 5 stars exclusively to the highest rank of writing and books and the pinnacle of literature. I will give 5 stars to the cozy romance that made me feel warm and fuzzy and moved me as a reader. So it's a little bit arbitrary and it changes a little bit depending on what I am hoping for and what I'm expecting of the book that I pick up. For example, when I pick up a Brandon Sanderson book published in 2025, he is a very established author and he has moved me as a reader so much. So there is that precedent that has been set when I pick up a Sanderson title. I'm gonna have higher expectations of a book from him because that's the caliber that I expect, and that's the caliber that I know he has achieved in the past for me, versus if I am picking up a debut author or a new to me author, that precedent hasn't been set. So when I go into a book with low to no or middling expectations and I'm really pleasantly surprised, I'm much more likely to be blown away and give it a more favorable rating perhaps, just because I'm a little bit more flexible with those expectations of the book. It depends on the book and what I'm hoping to get out of the book and what I know of the author already before I dive into the pages. Writing is absolutely a muscle that strengthens and develops further the more that you use it, the farther along in their career that an author gets, which is why I'm more flexible and which is why my expectations change depending on what I am picking up. So it's a little bit arbitrary and it is very relative to whatever book that I'm reading in that moment. If this is the first video of mine that you are watching, I typically read fantasy romance. Historical romance is my comfort genre. I love a good historical romance novel. I do love historical fiction as well. And I would say that I read quite widely. At the very least, I try to read quite widely. I love classic lit. I try to read sci-fi because it's not something I grew up reading, so I'm trying to find that love for it as an adult. I adored Agatha Christie throughout middle school, high school, post-secondary, so they're a very comforting author to me, as well as that subgenre of murder mystery. And I have had a very long-standing goal of trying to read 12 nonfiction books a year. And I don't think I have met that goal since my university days, but I have read 3 or 4. I've read a few nonfiction books so far this year. And like I've already said, my expectations for a book change on each individual book, but that's also impacted by the genre of the book I'm reading. If I'm picking up a fiction book, I am looking for a little bit of escapism. I'm looking for a really entertaining story with strong characters, with involved world building if it's a fantasy book, and I want to be completely engulfed in that world. I want the characters to have all of my focus, and I want to not put the book down. Whereas if I'm looking for a nonfiction title, if I'm reading nonfiction, then I want to learn something. I want to come away having a new appreciation for a subject or a deeper appreciation for a subject. And I also don't want to be spoken down to as the reader. I want it to be a very approachable way to impart knowledge on a subject. And then if I'm reading a classic novel, like I said, I love classics, and I want to have new knowledge to apply to my critical analysis of modern day titles. I want to have learned something from that classic book that really harkens towards the modern day, so that I can draw those parallels between books and I can dive a little bit deeper into the text. That's what I'm looking for when I pick up a classic novel. And by a classic novel, I do mean a Bronte or an Austen, but also The Black Company by Glenn Cook, which is heralded as a modern classic. That's the kind of critical lens that I'm bringing to that type of read. I really want to come away having gained a little bit more insight into that period of time and what the author was trying to say in that era, how it trickles down to our modern era as well. Now that I've provided all of that supplemental information of what goes into my reading habits, let's actually dive into the star rating system. And I am going to be very basic and just talk 5 through 1 stars, even though I do use quarter point increments like 3.25, 3.5, 3.75 when I'm rating a book, just because there is that gray area between star ratings and it is an arbitrary system, like I have said. But starting with the best of the best, the 5-star books. If I give a book 5 stars, it typically means that I absolutely loved it and I have no notes, or I have very, very few notes. And again, that shift in expectations. I gave The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Liese 5 stars, which is a really cutesy, comforting holiday romance. However, I have also given The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson 5 stars. And those are 2 very different pieces of fiction. One is a novella, one is 1,200 pages. So it is arbitrary, it is flexible. These are just my opinions on books. But if I give a book 5 stars, it means I loved it. It means I had an absolute great time reading it. And it means that all of my expectations were exceeded when I was reading it. So for an epic fantasy like The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, I had already read several Sanderson titles before this, so I knew what he was capable of, and he blew me away with the world building, with the character development in this book. It emotionally moved me, and it has stayed with me for several years. I have reread this book, most recently at the beginning of the year when I annotated it. And for me, a 5-star book is one that I don't want to put down. I don't want to stop and do the dishes. I don't even want to stop and sleep. I just want to see the story through till the end. And if, say, I do have to go on with real life because reality exists, if I have to put that book down, I'm still thinking about the characters. For the time that I've spent reading the book, those characters are still with me and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? How are they going to get through this? But then also after I turn the last page, I'll still find myself thinking about those characters and hoping that they're going to be okay. Another 5-star read this year for me was more recently Tower of Thorns by Juliet Marillier, and I did put some tabs to mark passages in this read as well. But this is another example of a relatively high fantasy novel, but it's like historical fantasy, and it is one that has really good world building, amazing character development, and it is a book that has stayed with me. These characters are still with me in my heart. I have one more book in this trilogy left to read, and then I have to say goodbye for now to Grimm and Blackthorn. But that's what a 5-star read means to me personally. It means I absolutely loved it, and I could probably talk your ear off for at least an hour about that book with just how much I loved it, whether that book was 100 pages or 1,200 pages. I just want to sing its praises. Next is a 4-star read for me, and 4 stars is still a great book. It's still an enjoyable read, and oftentimes it means the characters are still sticking with me. I don't want to put the book down. I'm thinking of the characters when I'm not immersed within the pages of the book, but there was just something missing. There was a little bit of world building that perhaps felt clunky, a little bit more character development that could have taken place to push the story to that 5-star tier. And there was just something, whether it was an idea or a concept or a character, that I thought had more potential than was met, and it just fell that little bit short for me. Alternatively, a 4-star read could be a 3-star read for half, 3/4 of the book, but then the conclusion packed such a punch that it blew me away. It exceeded my expectations, and it was enough to bump it to a 4-star read. I don't think I've ever had a 3-star read be bumped to 5 stars, just because I do factor in the full length of the book when I'm giving my rating. And if it was just middling for half or more than a half and had an amazing conclusion, then I'll talk about that in my review, but it'll probably only boost it that 1-star tier, maybe 1.5, depending on how generous I'm feeling when it comes down to writing that review. But examples of 4-star reads that I have read so far this year are The Scarlet Veil by Shelby Mahurin, which takes place in the same world as Serpent and Dove. And I fell in love with Serpent and Dove. That first book in the trilogy exceeded my expectations so much. It blew me away. And no book has lived up to the experience I had reading that first book in the series. So I wasn't very surprised that The Scarlet Veil was only a 4-star read for me, but I absolutely love the character development that took place in The Scarlet Veil for a character who was largely dismissed throughout the original trilogy. I also really enjoyed reading Valkyrie, the Women of the Viking World by Jóhanna Katrín Friðriksdóttir. This is one of the nonfiction titles I've read this year, and it was a little bit dry for my nonfiction taste. It read a little bit too much like a textbook. I'm a few years out of university. I have left my textbook days behind me. I want a little bit more personality injected into my nonfiction writing. That said, I really enjoyed the format that Friðriksdóttir told the story of Valkyrie through, the way that she approached the life of a Viking woman throughout the phases of their life, from infancy to childhood to maturity. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a really interesting way to tell that story, but there was just something that held me back from fully falling, not in love with this text, but from being fully engrossed. It was a book that I could set down and not think about for a day or two and then come back to. So there was just something that stopped me from giving Valkyrie 5 stars, but it was still a really enjoyable and informative read. Another book that I really enjoyed, and I've already sung its praises on this channel, is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, but I only gave it 4 stars, not 5 stars, because there was just something about it in which I could set down Divine Rivals and go about my day and not have that intense desire, that longing to stop everything and read. I really loved our characters. I enjoyed the world. I found the world building to be really intriguing and entertaining, but I could put down the book and go about my day. I didn't have to stop everything. So it was only 4 stars for me, even though I absolutely adored Divine Rivals. And the 4th book that I'm going to talk about that I read today, because I have a physical copy of it, is The Scoundrel Falls Hard by Sophie Jordan. This is the 2nd or 3rd book in the Duke Hunt series. I think it's the 3rd. And I loved this. We have a female blacksmith. We have a rogue character. There is a marriage of convenience, and then they fall in love. All of those are tropes that I love. And I love the fact that our blacksmith character is female within this book. But again, there was just something that prevented me from giving it 5 stars. It's quite fast-paced, as is often the case with insta-lust or insta-love type stories within only 300 pages or so. And I do love a little bit more tension in my stories, for the love to be drawn out a little bit more, I think. So while I loved The Scoundrel Falls Hard, it was a 4-star book for me. Next are my 3-star reads. And a 3-star book is still a decent rating. It means that it was an okay book. It was a good book, but it didn't blow me away. I didn't have that big emotional attachment to the world or the characters that I like to have when I pick up a story. I think all of us, when we pick up a new book, you want to have that phenomenal 5-star feeling more often than not. So a 3-star book, it means I still enjoyed it. I would probably still recommend it, but I would recommend it with a few caveats of what didn't work so well for me, or what I personally thought were the weaker parts of the story. And a 3-star read means that the characters probably won't stay with me long after I finish this book. If a 3-star read is the first book in a series, or it falls within a larger series, I'll probably still continue reading that series or continue reading books by that author, because I still enjoy the books that I give 3 stars. It just means that I didn't absolutely love them. And I have been really fortunate so far this year in that the majority of the books I have read and rated, I have given 3.5 stars and higher. So I've had a lot of good books and good reading experiences so far this year. But if I give a book 3 stars, it just means there's probably going to be a few caveats to how and who I would recommend it for. But some 3-star books that I have read so far in 2025 are Not for the Faint of Heart by Lex Croucher, which just didn't meet the expectations that I had for it. It is a sapphic Robin Hood retelling almost, with that historical setting, and I really wanted to fall in love with this story, with these characters, and there was just something that didn't quite sync for me, and I was left wanting more from the stories. Even though it was a decent book, I still enjoyed it. I also read Dungeons and Drama by Kristy Boyce, and this is the first book in a duology, and I read the second book first and enjoyed the second book more. So again, I was left just feeling a little bit disappointed by Dungeons and Drama, even though that setting, it's a YA contemporary romance with Dungeons and Dragons being very central to its plot line. I absolutely was so excited for that prospect, and it just fell a little bit flat. And then also The Duchess War by Courtney Milan. Milan is an author that I absolutely love, and this is actually the first full-length novel in a series by Milan that I absolutely love. But I only gave the first book 3 stars, and I gave the prequel novella to this series my whiskey for best short read last year, and then I continued on with this series and just fell in love more and more with this world. But the first book was just okay. I enjoyed it, but I didn't fall in love with it. Then there are my 2-star reads, and 2 stars is typically about as low as I will rate a book, just because I do feel guilty giving poor reviews or low ratings to books. So 2 stars is usually about as low as I will go, and this just means that I did not enjoy this story, and I probably would not recommend it, or if I did recommend it, it would come with a laundry list of all of the things that didn't work well for me, with the hopes that those examples might not needle you quite so much. Usually in a 2-star read, there are many tropes that just don't work well for me, or tropes that I usually love that I feel were executed poorly. It could also mean that there was something that took place within the pages of the book that I find to be somewhat irresponsible of the author and is not something that I would typically recommend. So like I've said, I've had a lot of great reads so far this year. So the lowest I've actually rated a book so far in 2025 is 2.5 stars. So not quite as extreme as my 2-star rating, but I am going to talk through the 3 books I have given 2.5 stars so far. And the first is going to be a historical romance, and that is The Scot Who Loved Me by Gina Conkle. This is the first book by Conkle that I have read. It takes place in an earlier era than I typically read with my historical romances, and I found that this did not meet my expectations. I went into this expecting kind of a light-hearted romance, and it is a second chance romance, which isn't my favorite trope, so that one's on me. But I found this book to be predominantly a heist novel, and there is nothing wrong with that. If I had went into The Scot Who Loved Me with the expectation of reading a heist novel, it probably would have been 3 stars. But that wasn't my expectation when I picked up this book. Even though there was talk on the back that they're trying to recover this gold, it's very much aimed in that, as you can tell by the cover, bodice ripper historical romance type of read. And I just found the romance to fall quite flat in this book. I did not believe that our characters were truly infatuated with one another, even though we were told that was the case. And because it was a second chance romance, they obviously had some past trauma and the reason why they didn't get together in the first place. And I don't think enough time was properly dedicated to sorting through that. So I was left a little bit disappointed by this read. I would recommend it, however, to historical romance readers with those caveats to better manage your expectations if you were going to pick this book up. The next book that I gave 2.5 stars this year is actually Dead Man's Hand by James J. Butcher. And I went into this book expecting something akin to a Dresden novel, and James J. Butcher's father is Jim Butcher, who wrote the Dresden Files. And those expectations were met. This was largely a middling read, but a good debut. I think this was coasting along at about 3.5 stars. There were a few things that didn't work great for me within the pages of this book, but because it was a debut, I was much more flexible in how I was viewing it. But then towards the end, there is a slur that is used to describe someone with a disability. And it's always tricky when that is used by a character, because that separation of, okay, what is the author trying to say with this usage, and how does it pertain to the overall plot? But for me, when reading this, there were 2 instances of the slur used very close together, in very close proximity, towards the end of the book. And as someone who has edited a manuscript, it felt like to me that was missed in the editing process, that was perhaps a word used throughout the manuscript, and there were just 2 instances where it was not caught. And even if that wasn't the case, if it was intentionally used and the author signed off on it, the editor signed off on it, Ace Publishing signed off on it, I think it could have used a sensitivity read or 2, because it did not add anything to the story. It negatively impacted my opinion of the main character, and that precedent, like, he had been written up to that point and that precedent hadn't been set. So it really shocked me when I came across it whilst I was reading, and negatively impacted my entire opinion on this book, unfortunately, because it was a fairly entertaining urban fantasy up until that point. But I just did not understand, and I do not understand, why that was decided to be used in such a really nasty way too. So I did not have a great ending experience to this book, and the more I sat with it after reading the last page, the more it just didn't sit well with me. So I did give Dead Man's Hand 2.5 stars. As I'm talking through it now, I'm wondering if maybe this is more like a 2-star rating for me, but alas, I gave it 2.5. We'll leave it at 2.5. And those are my reasons. So you can take away what you will. If that might not be something that bugs you, you might enjoy this urban fantasy. But I think there are better urban fantasies out there that do not punch down. I don't like when authors or characters, especially protagonists, punch down. It just feels unnecessary to me personally. And then the last book that I have rated 2.5 stars this year, at least so far, is one that I've spoken about recently, so I'll try to be brief. But that is, of course, The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Lind. And this book it didn't meet my expectations. And I was feeling, I think, a little bit blunt when I wrote this review. I think if I was being more generous, it's probably a 3-star book, but I found it to be very similar to The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, and I found the characters to be a little bit clunky and 2-dimensional. I didn't buy into the love that was allegedly taking place on the page, and I found the world to be intriguing and compelling. There was a lot of potential within this book, and I don't think it's a debut, but I saw so much potential within this book that didn't quite get achieved in my personal opinion. The world fell a little bit short. I just wanted more from this book, and I wanted just a touch more, not necessarily originality, but I wanted more depth to the characters, because I love a tropey book. I love a historical romance that just rehashes the same 3, 4, 5 tropes over and over again. I'm okay with authors exploring similar concepts, but if that's going to be the case, I really need to care for the characters. You need to make me feel their emotions to get me engrossed within the pages of your novel. And that unfortunately wasn't the case with Ren. Then finally, 1-star books. And I do not think I have ever given a book 1 star. At least I haven't within the last 5 years or so. And part of the reason why I feel so badly in giving a book a low rating is because I think at this point in my life, I'm pretty good at sussing out what is going to work for me and what is not going to work for me. So if I read a book that I am compelled to give 1 star to, it's probably because that book was just not intended for me. I am not the intended audience. And with not being the intended audience for that book, I feel guilty for some reason for negatively bringing down its overall rating because that book's just not for me. So rather than give a book that I didn't enjoy 1 star, I'll just give it no rating and hopefully, ideally, write a review explaining a little bit more of my thoughts and feelings and what didn't work for me. But I don't want to bring down its overall rating because there are so many books out there that are beloved online that just did not gel with me and didn't work for me. The Run in the Holly Library being the most recent, I guess. But yeah, I don't want to bring down the overall rating just because one book wasn't for me. The only time I think that I would give a book 1 star is if I found it to be really horrible, if it contained material within it that was really damaging or toxic, but then I probably wouldn't be reading it because again, I'm fairly good at sussing out what I think is going to be an entertaining, enjoyable escapism type of read. And I've also DNF'd a few books that I've tried to plow through and there was just something about the narrator or the author that some views were slipping through that just did not concern me and I was not interested in entertaining because again, I'm outside of an academic setting now. When I pick up a book, it's quite casual, it's very personal. So the only scenario in which I can imagine myself giving a book 1 star is not one that I see myself in quite often. But I do sometimes just leave a book unrated if I'm not the intended audience. An example of this so far in 2025 is actually Life and Death by Stephanie Meyer. I read this earlier this year and I don't think it was a great book. It's the gender bent version of Twilight. But also, I was such a Twilight fan when I was in middle school and high school that I couldn't bring it in me to give that book 2 stars, Life and Death, because it was such a part of my adolescent reading experience. And it's hard to say whether just reading it now as a 29-year-old is why I viewed it through such a harsh critical lens. But yes, Life and Death is the only example of a book so far this year that I just didn't rate. So that is what I am inclined to do when I find myself in that scenario where I just know that that book was not meant for me. I'm not the intended audience, and that is okay. There are so many other books out there that are those 5-star reads that you just have to find the book that is right for you, where you are in your life in that moment. But that's where I'll leave things for today. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please let me know down in a comment below, are you an emotional reviewer like I am? Or do you have a system that you rank and rate your books with regardless of vibe or expectation? Because I'm really curious, I'd love to know. For now, this is going to be it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video again, and I will be back soon with a new one. Bye for now.